So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm a principal, so I have to get everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, there you are. My name is Liz Dozier, principal of Fenger High School on Chicago's very far south side in the Roseland community. I want to talk to you today a little bit about how I believe turning around schools is not difficult. And so you might think to yourself, well, how is that possible? How can that be true? Now, it is challenging, and I think that it's emotionally taxing. It is oftentimes expensive, and it can be a feat, but it's not difficult. And it's not difficult if we know what to do. And I feel like the research is out there and we know really clearly what to do. And so I want to tell you a little story about my school. So Fenger High School in 2009 was named one of the lowest performing schools in the state of Illinois. And it was deemed so by standards that you can kind of all probably put together. So 20% dropout rate every year. We had over 300 arrests my first year there inside of the school building, not outside or in the community, but inside of the school building. You can imagine low test scores, just goes on and on and on. The one stat that really just rings true in my heart is, I remember when we first got there as a turnaround organization, as a team, there was 40% of the freshmen were on track. And let me tell you what that means. The University of Chicago does research. They can really clearly predict whether or not a student will graduate in 4 years, whether or not they're on track as a freshman. And so 40% of our freshmen were on track, i.e. meaning 4 out of every 10 students that walk through that door in their freshman year would ever wind up graduating high school. 4 out of every 10. So what do you do with that? When you walk into an environment that's just in its bone marrow is violent, there's dropout, there's kids just not being successful. What do you do with that? And I say that the path is clear and we know what to do. And it's exactly what Melanie talked about before. It's about providing kids with resources. It's not even that difficult. It's expensive, but it's not difficult. And so we did some of the very similar things that she talked about earlier, which was providing social workers, counselors, making sure that we're working with kids, building relationships, partnering with organizations to take kids out of the community, organizations like Embark, which you'll hear from later on today. And really providing this holistic supports around children, lowering the class size, working with teachers to help them understand some of the issues that children face when they walk in the door. And in doing that, within 4 years, here's where we've come. So I'll read you some of our stats. Graduation rates up by over 30%. Attendance, double-digit increases. We had one of the largest increases in college enrollment in the city the year before last. We haven't got a recent college enrollment. And that stat I gave you on freshmen on track is up to 83%. So up from where we were at 40%, 4 out of every 10, now to 8 out of every 10, a little over 8 out of every 10. But here's what's really interesting, is that kind of continuum that she showed, that red to yellow, I would say, and we were featured on, and been featured on multiple news stories and World Nightly News and NPR talking about the progress of our school, because our school had really gone from a red to a yellow. And we were able to get to the yellow because of resources. We had a grant, about $1.6 million per year to do what is right, what we know is right by kids. At the end of this past year, our grant ended. And as our grant ended, basically all of those resources that I talked about were pulled out of the school. Same kids, same issues, but the resources were pulled out and we weren't able to or are not able to provide in the same way. And the interesting thing as I share some of our successes with you is that we're at this interesting paradox of here's where we ended last year on this kind of high note and going higher. But we've started to see some of the same trends going back into the red at our school in terms of fighting, in terms of kids like not having that social emotional support and acting out. And so I guess what I'm really here today to tell you is that turnaround is possible, but obviously it requires resources. And I believe it requires the commitment of every single person to push and do what's right for children. And I believe a lot of times it comes in the form of I don't know how else to say it, but it comes in the form of making really difficult decisions. When we think about wars and we think about how we spend our money and what we do with our money as a country, we have to start thinking about reinvesting in our children. And all children, but especially those, well, thanks. I appreciate that. But I think especially those in the lowest performing and the lowest poverty quartiles of our society, because really you can think of it as a social justice issue, or you can think of it as an economic issue. Either way, it affects our children's lives, it affects our city, and ultimately it affects the standing of our country and where we will go in the future. And so I just want to leave you with that. Thank you.